Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for a joint simulcast of Zoom into Books and the Big Time Talker podcast. It's everywhere. iHeartMedia. You can find it anywhere that you get your podcast these days, even Spotify. Hey, those guys are in trouble these days. If you want to listen to the podcast, it's brought to you by SpeakerMatch.com, the world's largest online virtual speakers bureau. If you want to watch on Facebook or on YouTube and send us your questions for our guest author tonight, award-winning author Joel Burcat, we would love to hear from you. Just let us know what you want to know about his brand new book, Strange Fire. And I love the way Joel writes books. These are thrillers in the truest sense. So if you're into John Grisham, you're into John LaCroix, if you like Lee Child and the Jack Reacher books, you're going to love these series of books. And Joel Burcat, thanks for being here. And congratulations. This is your International Book Launch Day.
Well, that's right. Thank you very much, Burke. I figure it's the internet, and this is heard around the world.
That's exactly right. And I hear that you're big in Zimbabwe. I don't know why that is, but I hear you're big.
Actually, there may be somebody listening in from Singapore tonight.
Outstanding. Wherever you are, if you have questions or comments for Joel and Strange Fire, we would love to hear from you. You see the book cover if you're watching online right now. It's an amazing book cover. It makes you want to grab it off the shelf and take it home and tear into it, especially if you love thrillers. I know that this is the third in a series of books about this young hotshot attorney, Mike Jacobs. But for folks that are not familiar with your books and what you do, give us the sort of condensed Joel Burcat version of what Strange Fire is all about.
Sure, I'm delighted to. Thanks, Burke. Strange Fire is a suspenseful and a gripping novel about incidents that are occurring in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, which is part of the area where there's a lot of fracking for natural gas going on in Pennsylvania. And what's happened is that there are wells that are being contaminated, and contractors are disappearing and people are dying. And the protagonist of the story, a young environmental lawyer working for Pennsylvania DEP named Mike Jacobs, who's all of 29 years old. Mike is tasked with the job of helping to investigate what's happening up in Bradford County. Now, Mike is very concerned about the environment. He loves working for DEP, but he's a normal guy. He's like you or me. He's a hardworking guy and just wants to do the right thing. And he gets up there, and DEP has taken the position that, in fact, the fracking has not impacted the neighbor's wells or the township well. And he decides after a period of time that maybe DEP might have made a mistake, but he's got to defend the department. And he's faced with the likes of his old law school nemesis, a lawyer named Darius Moore, who's at a law firm out of Washington, and he's faced with the Cajun director of operations for Yukon Oil and Gas, Norby LaFleur, and he's got to try and figure this all out as much as people are pushing back against him. So I think it's a really exciting mystery. It is a legal thriller. There's a lot of there's a fair amount of legal thriller stuff in this story, but this is a thriller. This is a thriller with a lot of interesting stuff going on that goes way above and beyond being just a mere legal thriller. But I do like to. I was very happy when somebody compared me to John Grisham, so I'm very happy with that. I'll take that.
That ain't bad. That ain't bad. Joel Burcat is our guest tonight. He's the award-winning author of Strange Fire, the latest in the series of Mike Jacobs legal thrillers set in that world of fracking and environmental law. Now, you did that for a living, and in this book, as you said, this Mike Jacobs character, he has to go up against kind of his bosses and what they want him to do for the Department of Environmental Protection. And I wonder if, as a young environmental attorney, if that ever happened to you. Did you ever start to dig into one of these cases and find out, wow, I got to go against the company line here?
Well, it happens actually all the time, and especially for lawyers working for the state or for US EPA, because the agency, whoever that is at the agency, takes a position, and then the lawyers are required to defend that position. So in this case, which is, I'm going to say, a fairly common thing that happens, the department takes the position that the drilling did not cause any of the contamination that's occurring. Mike actually starts falling for the department's geologist, a woman named Missy Shelton. And of course, that makes the story even a little bit more interesting. But he is caught in between what the department is telling him to do and what he's believing is going on. And this happens, like I said, this is a fairly common occurrence for environmental lawyers, especially those working for the state, is that, the state or EPA or some agency takes one position and the lawyer's got to defend it, even though ultimately the lawyer may not agree with that position. Not uncommon also for lawyers in private practice as well, I might add.
Joel Burcat is a retired attorney and the author of this new legal thriller, Strange Fire. It is the international book launch of Strange Fire from our friends at Headline Books, available now at Amazon.com, headlinebooks.com, bookstores everywhere. You can visit Joel online. Your website is joelburcat.com, is that right?
Yes, very difficult to remember. Just my name, joelburcat.com.
Joel Burcat, B-U-R-C-A-T, Burcat.com. And this isn't just a book. This isn't just a legal thriller. This is, am I getting this right? This is the Kirkus Reviews Book of the Week?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much. I just learned that this morning. I get, like everybody else, I get dozens and dozens of emails from all different kinds of places, and Kirkus Reviews, which is one of the most respected national reviewers in the country. Right. I get their stuff 2 or 3 times a day, and I'm scrolling through it and I'm looking down and it says best books, and I'm looking down and it says best books of the week, and I look down and there's Strange Fire right there. I was so excited. So I didn't get any advance warning that it was going to happen. It was just the book just appeared there. And so I'm delighted, obviously, that they identified it as the best book, one of the 6 best books of the week. So I'm very, very excited about that. And I hope that it brings it to more people's attention. So yeah, Kirkus Reviews, that's a big one. And I'm very happy with that.
Oh, that's great. Look, you're an award-winning author, and so I'm sure it feels good to be reviewed as one of the books of the week. But I wonder how much of you doing this and doing it really well really comes back to the fact that you know your subject matter inside out. In other words, could someone who is not or has not practiced law write a great legal thriller? Or, in your case, someone who doesn't know anything about fracking, or your other books, about the coal mining industry or that environmental law? Would it be difficult, do you think, for them to write a book in that genre? Did you knowing that stuff so well make it a little easier glide path?
It does. And let me unpack what you said here a little bit. So I practiced environmental law for 40 years. I went to law school to be an environmental lawyer. I went to college, and in my second year of college, I decided I was going to be an environmental lawyer. So I took a Bachelor of Science degree in geography, which at the time in the 1970s was like getting an earth science degree. And I did that specifically so that I would learn all about the environment. And then, like I said, I went to law school to become an environmental lawyer. And then I practiced environmental law, first with the state, with Pennsylvania's DEP, the predecessor to DEP, and then in private practice. So I know environmental law, I know environmental issues, and I'm not an environmental scientist, but I can certainly talk with them, and I can certainly understand them, and I can certainly relate to them and relate what they say, as I did over and over again in courtrooms and in all kinds of different forms when I had to do that. So I really do believe that I understand the environmental issues pretty well. And then in terms of the law, well, that's what I did for 40 years. Just 3 years ago, I was named, actually my last year of practice, I was named Central Pennsylvania's Environmental Litigator of the Year by Best Lawyers in America. So, I mean, by third parties recognizing me as I'm going to say, a pretty good environmental litigator and environmental lawyer. But, when you look at a book like a John Grisham book, or Scott Juror, or Lisa Scottolini, those are people who are and have been practicing lawyers, and they know their stuff. And that's what makes their legal thrillers particularly good. There are a couple of people out there who are not lawyers who have actually written some damn fine legal thrillers. Trying to think who off the top of my head. I can't think right now, of course, off the top of my head, but I know there have been a couple of them who have written some pretty good legal thrillers without being lawyers. I've read Mr. Grisham's books, The Pelican Brief and The Appeal and Gray's Mountain. and they're really good books, but you can read, as you're reading it, you get the sense that he really doesn't know the environmental issues as thoroughly as somebody else might have known those environmental issues. He writes a great legal thriller.
And maybe that's why the stuff that John Grisham, for example, that he writes in a small town courtroom in Mississippi rings so true, because he spent so much time there, right?
When he's writing about small town courtrooms in Mississippi and even large law firms, nobody can touch him. Let's just say that.
Strange Fire is the Kirkus book of the week. One of them this week is by Joel Burcat, our award-winning author and our guest on Zoom into Books and the Big Time Talker podcast. Autograph books are available during this international book launch. Joel will personalize it for you. If you'd like to pick one up, hop into our chat box and we will get you squared away. You've got some pretty heavy hitters who are saying some pretty great things about your book. You know, John LaCroix, for example, who's written a ton of bestsellers, and Bill Landy, who wrote Defending Jacob. When you get those kinds of accolades from your peers, is there like an 18-year-old Joel Burcat that goes, man, I can't believe that's happening?
Oh yes, you definitely are walking around on air for a while after something like that happens, and you never know. I mean, the book goes out way in advance, long before there's a fancy cover on it, long before all of the commas are corrected and all of the typos are corrected, and it goes out to authors. You know, they really, it's a wonderful thing among authors, is that they really do try to help each other out. But no author like Bill Landy, who wrote Defending Jacob, or Lisa Gardner, who's written some terrific books, Scott Berry, who praised my last book. No author is going to put their name on something and say that it's a great book unless they feel it is a great book. So when I got the really nice blurbs back, little reviews back from Bill Landy and John LaCroix and Lisa Gardner, and previously when I've gotten it from people like Steve Berry, I mean, that just makes you feel awesome. It's a great feeling. And the other thing too is it goes in the pay it forward category. So the time will come when some young author will come to me and say, hey, Mr. Burcat, would you please take a look at my book and write a blurb? And I certainly will do my very best to do that for a young author someday.
At that point, Joel will say, get off my line, kid. Get out of here.
I don't think so.
Strange Fire is the book. You can see it right over our author's shoulder if you're watching online right now. It's from Headline Books. It's one of the Kirkus Reviews books of the week, and it's available now. Bookstores everywhere. Ask for it by name. Pick it up online, of course, at any of the online booksellers, including headlinebooks.com. And you can also get it at joelburcat.com, the international book launch of Strange Fire. Hey, Joel, so you write about what you know. You live still in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. You're right in the center of the state there. And fracking is a thing there. But someone watching right now may not have any idea what that means. So can you give me a non-lawyerly description of what fracking actually is?
Well, there are two ways of describing it. Let me describe it first the way the industry would describe it. So understand that old traditional conventional drilling involved drilling a borehole down into the ground until you got to the point where the oil or the gas was, and then pulling the drill bit back out and then having the oil and the gas come to the surface.
It gushes out just like in the movies. Yeah.
It gushes out just like in the movies. That's how it was done for 125 years everywhere. It was just like in the movies. What happened was, though, that the engineers realized that there are rock formations that they call tight. So you got shale and you've got other rocks that are really, really dense and really hard. And not only that, but they can be really deep as well. And some of these scientists and engineers figured out a way to make that borehole go straight down vertically, just like it used to, and then turn and go horizontally, and then follow that seam of rock, in some cases several miles, if you can believe that, utilizing some advanced computer mechanisms and drive mechanisms. And they can follow that seam, even though the seam is probably dipping and curving, they'll follow that seam. Now we're getting to the hydraulic fracturing part. So what the engineers would say is, okay, when you finally get to the point where you can't go any further for whatever reason, the end of the seam, geology, geography, the mining rights, whatever it might be, they stop. They actually cause a small charge, a small explosion to take place that busts open the pipe under the ground. And then, this is the hydraulic fracturing part of the fracking part, they actually force millions of gallons of mostly water, about 98% water, down into the ground. That's what a oil and gas man would say is fracking. They're now forcing that water down into the ground and causing the rock to pop open, and then that allows the oil and the gas to come back up. In popular parlance, everything is fracking. So from the moment the drill rig shows up on the site, when they start drilling the hole, when they put the bit down into the ground, when they turn the bit horizontally, and then when they do the actual fracking part, I would say in modern normal parlance, non-technical, non-industry parlance, people would call the entire process fracking.
And in your book, Strange Fire, you've got this young hotshot attorney, Mike Jacobs, who works for the Department of Environmental Protection. And he's called into this county where fracking is happening. And there's, all sorts of murder and mayhem and badness that's going on. And he's got to figure it all out. And I don't want to give too much of the book away. But that's sort of the backdrop of your book, Strange Fire. In the real world, because this is a great, fantastic made-up story, but in the real world, again, for folks that know nothing about this, why is this method of getting oil and gas out of the ground a bad thing? I mean, it's pretty controversial. You read about it in the news, but I'm not sure that a lot of people really kind of get into the nuts and bolts. So why is this a bad thing? Why would a young attorney like Mike Jacobs go to this county and why would all this be happening?
Well, let's put it this way. It's a highly regulated activity. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that this is heavy industry. This is a very technical, very difficult, heavy industry, and it comes into an area like, let's say, Bradford County or Western Pennsylvania, where there probably hasn't been any heavy industry for 50 or 75 years. I mean, you have to go back to when the areas were logged over, when the original oil drilling took place there in the early part of the 20th century. You have to go back to when the railroads came through, when the canals went through. That was all considered heavy industry at one time. So now you haven't had heavy industry in these areas for 50 or 75 or 100 years, some cases never. And now you're bringing in this heavy industry that's very, very highly regulated, coming into a part of Pennsylvania or Ohio, West Virginia, other states where there hasn't been any. So if you're talking to folks who are involved in the industry, they don't understand necessarily why there should be any controversy.
Yeah, this should be a good thing, right? You're bringing jobs into an area that doesn't have them.
Not only jobs, but the industry folks are saying, hey, it's because of fracking that we have all of this natural gas and oil to make America energy independent. That's what they would say. And they would say, not only that, we're bringing in lots of jobs, we're paying lots of tax money, we're paying a lot of revenue into the state, and everybody should be happy about it. The neighbors, however, on the other hand, first of all, they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not getting any royalties. I don't have any natural gas on my property. I'm not getting anything out of this. Not only that, but I can't get a job with the industry because they like to use people who are tried and true. So they're using guys out of Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas and other states where they have a lot of history and a lot of background in doing this industry. So I can't get a job. And not only that, but all the prices of everything went up. And not only that, everybody here is speaking with a Texas accent all of a sudden up here in northern Pennsylvania, and the stores have raised all their prices, and on top of all of that, and this is the thing that I think is a true concern that many people have. Top of all of that, my water's gone bad. My herd of cows suddenly died one night, and on top of all of that, I think that there are climate change issues that are involved. And what is this methane going to do to our environment? So you've got, the people on the one side who say, hey, this is a great thing. We're bringing all this industry in. We're bringing money into the economy. We're making America energy independent. And the industry would say, there may be accidents, but 99.99% of the time, it doesn't hurt anybody. People who are locals who oppose fracking are going to say, wait a minute, hold the phone. People are being injured in many different ways. You're impacting the environment. You're potentially impacting the climate, and you're bringing in all these folks who have never been here before. And I can't find a parking space on Main Street, and I can't afford the prices anymore because the prices have gone up, because you have all these strangers in town who are taking up all the apartments and hotel rooms and everything else, and therefore it's a bad thing for us. So it's a real case of which side of the street are you on, because depending upon your perspective, you either think it's the greatest thing or you think it's one of the most awful, evil things that ever happened.
And just like a lot of other great legendary legal thrillers, if you follow the money in Strange Fire, that's where you'll find the badness. Joel Burcat is our guest today. His book, Strange Fire, just named one of Kirkus Review's books of the week. And the kind words are coming in for it. If you'd like to pick up a copy, autographed copies, personalized by Joel Burcat, available during the international book launch at headlinebooks.com, joelburcat.com. And you can always visit any of the other online or physical bookstores and grab this great page turner, Strange Fire. Our guest is Joel Burcat. All right, Joel. Mike Jacobs, fictional character, maybe a little of a young Joel Burcat in there. You were in that industry, you said, for over 40 years as an environmental lawyer. So I'm going to put you on the spot. You talked about both sides of this thing. So what's the deal? Is fracking bad for the environment? What did you learn as an attorney in doing that for over 40 years? Is this a bad thing? Should it be shut down? Or is that an awful lot of overreach by environmentalists?
I'm really glad you asked me that question, Burke.
Somehow I don't think so.
No, I thought about
Put
this
you on the spot.
Now, the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, I think we're already looking at a time when we should be moving past carbon-based fuels, coal, oil, gas. We should be moving past all of those fuels as a starting point. Climate change is a very real thing. The carbon dioxide from the burning of fuels, the methane that gets released during the burning of natural gas, all of that contributes to climate change. Methane, they say, is a very powerful greenhouse gas, with even 40 times as powerful as carbon dioxide alone is. So at some point, we've got to move past that. If you look at the various scientific organizations that are involved, they're saying you got to do it yesterday, that it's been too long already that we've been dependent on carbon-based fuels. We got to get away from that. We have to start looking at renewables. We have to start looking at solar, wind, nuclear, and other non-carbon based fuels. Conservation, of course, is a big one. In terms of the fracking itself, I believe that the problem is not so much with the fracking. I think it's with bad fracking. I think that there are many companies out there, including the biggest companies, that from time to time have had accidents. These are accidents that relate to everything from as ridiculous as a truck backing over a 40-gallon drum or 55-gallon drum of chemicals that then gets into the groundwater, to something very serious as when they put that pipe down into the ground, it's got to be cemented in place. If that cement isn't done right, then gas and other substances can leak out. And I think that all contributes to the potential for damage to the groundwater. Also, that water, they use anywhere from 3 to 7 million gallons of water, generally fresh groundwater, that's used in the fracking process. So when they force that water down into the borehole to frack the formation, that's a lot of water that's going in there, and that water has got upwards of 2% of the water is chemicals and sand, and they're able to recycle some of that water. So maybe 90% of that water is able to be recycled and reused in the fracking process. But it also means that 10% of it can't be recycled or reused, and it's got to be disposed of somehow. There were a lot of bad judgments and bad things that were done not too many years ago, within the past decade, in terms of the disposal of that water. So, you know, I am a believer in technology. So technologies such as wind power, solar power, these are all technologies that were not so great 15, 20 years ago and have developed to be much better today than they were 15 or 20 years ago. I do believe in technology, and I do believe ultimately that technology can be improved. But I think that the problem right now that exists is that this very heavy industry which is a highly regulated industry, has from time to time has huge mistakes that have huge consequences.
Strange Fires, the book. Joel Burcat is the author, and he's taking a stand. He says, this is not a good thing, this fracking. And fracking is the backdrop to this incredible legal thriller that Kirkus Reviews has just named one of their 6 books of the week. If you like page turners, you like legal thrillers, I think you may want to check out Strange Fire, the latest in Joel's Mike Jacobs series. All right, let's get into the nitty gritty of how this story came together. Was there an article that you read about fracking? Was there some impetus that was the jumping off point for you to write this story and frame it up around this industry?
I was involved as an environmental lawyer in every industry that I could think of. I mean, literally, you name it, I was involved in that industry at one time or another, either as a regulator in my early days, working on the other side from the coal industry, and with respect to water pollution. I was involved in all of those industries at one time or another. And when I went into private practice, I continued my involvement, representing a number of those companies over time, also representing citizens, but mostly representing those companies. And I'm going to say about 15 years ago or so, when fracking started to become pretty big and prevalent in Pennsylvania, I became involved in the fracking industry, representing a number of the companies, the drilling oil and gas companies. And so I learned an awful lot about it. One thing I was very, very careful to do was not to base my story on any clients or any real people that I worked with. So it's more like the kinds of people, the kinds of clients, the kinds of settings. There were a couple of cases that I found in court cases and environmental hearing board cases that I did use and rely on, not my cases, but cases that were published cases that helped me to write the story. But I was very careful not to base it on any case that I worked on. Rather, I based it on general scenarios. So a scenario such as water pollution, a scenario such as an accident that occurs at a drilling site, a scenario such as the potential for sabotage at a drilling site, which is an issue in this case. I over the years, and not even involved in the oil and gas industry, I saw many instances over the years where it was apparent that somebody tried to sabotage an operation, and often in a kind of a humorous way, because they absolutely had no idea what they were doing. And in fact, what they did was so outrageous that the regulator came in. They said, "There's no way. There's no bleach in this anywhere on this site except right here, and this bleach didn't come from this site." It was just so apparent that somebody thought that by dumping, say, bleach into a borehole in a non-fracking situation, that somehow or another that would implicate the operator of that site. But as soon as they did the water well testing, they knew that couldn't come from the operation. They knew it had been juiced, that somebody had tried to get away with something. Somebody was sabotaging the operation. So it's based on really a career's worth of incidents going way beyond just the oil and gas industry, and certainly cases that I read from court cases and other places relating to the oil and gas industry.
You said something interesting, and I'm not going to let you get away with it without calling you out on it. You sort of slid it in there in the answer to my question, and that was that you worked for some of the fracking companies, some of the companies that did this oil and gas drilling. And I remember, my only exposure to this industry, Joel, other than being through a couple of those towns where fracking had caused a boom in those towns economically. And I thought, wow, this is great for these towns that were, in serious trouble right before this. Was a movie, I think it was called Promised Land with Matt Damon, where it came out maybe 10 years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie, but in that movie, he worked for one of those companies, and they would come in and try to lowball the property owners and sneak in there and get their property rights from them so that they could do some fracking. So if in one case you say, this is bad and we need to move away from this, and on the other end, you worked for the big evil oil and gas companies, what gives here?
Well, full disclosure, and I believe I've said this many times, and probably every time I talk, Of course, I worked for a number of the drilling companies. I've never hidden from my background. But one thing I found, and I'm going to say this is universal, not just the oil and gas industry, but every industry. The vast majority of the work that I did as an environmental lawyer, and that most environmental lawyers do, is what we call counseling. So a client comes to us and says, Mr. Environmental Lawyer, we need to do X, whatever X is, and we want to comply with the law. We want to get permits. We want to be able to build this thing. We want to get it through as fast as we can. So we don't want to horse around with doing anything the wrong way. And then the lawyer takes, a shelf load of books. Back when lawyers used books, takes a shelf load of books and has to interpret the law to counsel the clients so that the clients understand what it is that they have to do, and then works with the agency. It's not always necessarily a conflict with the agency, but the agency generally will push back, and you work with the agency to try to develop a permit and try to develop a way that a company can comply with the law. And I'm going to say that if you talk to environmental lawyers, they will, I think, to a person say 100% of the time, the clients are trying to do the right thing. Now, they're not going to, most clients aren't going to do more than they have to, but they want to do what they're required to do. And that's the counseling side of things. Now, the other side is what we call the enforcement side. So the client has the thing that happens, whatever that might be. And again, it's not just the oil and gas industry, it's every industry. It's doctors with x-ray machines. It's people
when things go sideways, you're there to help them.
People with septic tanks, homeowners with septic tanks, it's coal companies, it's oil and gas drilling companies. They have a problem that occurs. The x-ray machine isn't working right. The septic tank leaks. The coal mine operator does something wrong at his coal mine. He allows chemicals to escape into a stream. There's a problem at the drill pad. And then you put on your litigator's hat and you end up representing the company because the government will come in, and the government may want a gigantic civil penalty, and they may want something that your client is willing to push back on. And then the lawyer represents them to try to minimize the penalty and minimize the enforcement action if you can do that. At the end of the day, I'm going to say maybe 95% of the time the cases are settled. But 5% of the time you might have to go to a hearing and represent the client in a hearing on that. And then you leave it up to a judge. Most cases in Pennsylvania, an environmental hearing board judge who then ultimately makes that decision. So it's one of the things that environmental lawyers in particular, and maybe we're unique, but that was my exposure for all of my career. One of the things that environmental lawyers in particular value probably more than anything else is their integrity. So when you go to an agency and you sit down with the agency and you say, I represent XYZ, and this is the information that I'm giving you about XYZ. If you don't have integrity with that agency, if they just blow you off and they say, oh, don't trust a word that Jones is saying, because we all know that Jones or Smith or whatever is never honest with us. Well, you're not going to be effective as an environmental lawyer. So environmental lawyers, to a person, value their integrity, and they will do everything that they possibly can to try to bring the client into compliance. And very often, by the way, they're the most effective ones at convincing the board of directors, at convincing the client that they've got to do something a certain way, even though it may be very, very costly. I will say, again, cards on the table, there were a couple times that I had clients who I believed were trying to get away with something, who had lied to me and lied to the agency.
Interesting. Joel Burcat is a retired environmental lawyer, full-time author now. And in my case of full disclosure, he's kind of a big deal. He has one of the Kirkus Review's books of the week this week for his new legal thriller, Strange Fire. And Joel will be a featured author at the Headline Books booth at the Association of Writers and Publishers big convention in Philadelphia, in his home state. I think that's your hometown too, right? Aren't you a Philly boy?
I'm a Philly boy and I'm proud of it. By the way, Burke, I thought you were going to ask me a follow-up to that last point that I made. I was waiting on it. That is, well, what about those one or two guys that you thought were trying to get away with something? Because what I was going to tell you was that I fired those clients.
Did you really? You actually fired the client?
Oh, yes. If I ever had a client that lied to me, that was it. I was done with them. I wasn't going to have any, because again, it was my integrity on the line. as well. And if a client was lying to me, it's happened, I'm thinking about 2 instances. I fired the client. I wasn't going to have anything further to do with them.
Interesting. If you want to meet Joel Burcat in person and grill the attorney, you can do that when he heads to Philadelphia for this Association of Writers and Publishers event. The big conference is March 23rd through the 25th. If you'd like to get a copy of Strange Fire right now and see for yourself if it is the page turner that Kirkus Review says it is, one of their books of the week, you can pick it up at headlinebooks.com, joelburcat.com, amazon.com, wherever you get your books. When you sat down to write this thing, and there may be some young writers here who are saying, hey, I want to see how this guy did this. How did he make a book that Kirkus is calling out as one of their books of the week? Did you have a rough outline in mind? Did you know where this thing was going? Did you sit down and write for 1-2 hours a day? Did you have a word count? What was the process in putting this thing together so it would be this incredible page turner that people want to burn through?
You're asking a question that has multiple layers, and I'm going to answer it as fully as I can and not take too much time. So I'm legally blind, and I became legally blind I have a disease known as NAION, non-arteritic anterior ischemic optic neuropathy. And some people call that a stroke of the eye. And I had that in my left eye in 2017. And then I had that in my right eye in January of 2019. And the disease, from the time it starts happening till you are blind, takes about 6 to 8 weeks. And then the disease stops, it stops progressing. And that's what I had, first in one eye and then a year and a half later in the other eye. Mm-hmm. So I realized, thankfully, I can still see a lot of things. I have a yard-wide monitor. That's an ultra high definition monitor. If I put words all the way across the page, I can read them pretty well. So I was sitting in my house. I was on disability at the time from the office because I couldn't work. And I was sitting in my house moping around, and I had the TV on, and I was watching, we've all seen it now, you know, these Paralympians who had lost a leg and who were skiing. And I was thinking to myself, boy, that's remarkable. These guys are skiing down a slope, and they're really doing something that you wouldn't think that a person who's lost a limb would be able to do. And I thought, well, what's the equivalent of that for a writer? And I thought, well, the equivalent of that for a writer has got to be to write a book, to write a novel. So in March of 2019, really just a month after I had become legally blind, I sat down and I started writing Strange Fire. Now, the other thing too has nothing to do with my vision issues, is I'm a terrible typist. I was a terrible typist before I lost my vision. I'm still a terrible typist.
Things haven't changed.
Well, it's gotten a little worse actually, but I'm more of a terrible typist. So I got a voice to text a software program called Dragon, and I used Dragon, and in the space of 7 weeks, I wrote the first very rough draft of Strange Fire. And that's how I did it. I sat down, and every day for several hours a day, I did nothing other than write the book. And I just knocked it out. I had the concept in my mind. I did it no differently than I would have if I had complete vision, meaning that I generally don't like to outline. I know there are a lot of writers who do like to outline, and some very famously outline very extensively. I never did, except if I get into a tight spot, I might want to outline how I'm going to get my characters out of that tight spot. But generally speaking, I don't outline the story. But I do have in my mind a very definite idea as to where the story is going. So I knew how I wanted the story to begin. I knew something about the middle of the story, not all the details, and I had an idea as how I wanted the story to end. And I sat there and just every day, 6 days a week, I worked on the story until it was done. When it was done, it was about 80,000 words. Finished, it came out at about 110,000 words, and meaning that I made quite a few changes, obviously, along the way. But that was how I wrote that story.
So I had read the New York Times article that was done about you and you're writing this book as a legally blind man. I didn't want to bring it up. You did bring it up. So I want to ask you a little bit about that. I mean, here you are, you're a hotshot attorney. working in environmental law for a long time in Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania. And what happens? How do you find out? Do you wake up one day and your vision is bad in one eye? I mean, walk us through that journey.
Well, if this disease, which is different than other eye diseases, in my case, I found out later on what caused the blindness were blood clots inside my eyeball. So if you can think of an eyeball, there's your eyeball, and then you've got this stringy cord thing that goes to your brain. That's your optic nerve, that stringy cord thing that goes to your brain. Inside my eyeball, on the back of my eyeball, that's where the blood clots formed. And those blood clots, there are maybe 1.5 million little nerve fibers going through that little cord that goes to your brain, that optic nerve. And those little blood clots killed off some of those nerve fibers.
And when did you figure it out? What caused you to know that this was even happening inside your head?
You perceive it, you see it. Your vision, you start to lose vision. I mean, at first you do this. It's like, oh gosh, I guess I got something in my eye here, and I guess I got to blink a little harder. Maybe I'll get some eye drops. And of course, none of that's going to work, because what's happening is in the back of your eye, not in the front of your eye. And ironically, I was going to visit a client in Oklahoma City, and I got on an airplane, and from the time I got on the airplane in Harrisburg to the time I got off the airplane in Oklahoma City, I had really started to lose a fair amount of vision. There's really
during that flight, you saw it degenerate during.
Oh yes, I mean, and because I had already had it happen in the other eye, I knew what was going on, but it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, they couldn't turn the plane around or drop me off at a hospital and fix it. There's really very little that they can do for it, depending upon the kind of NaION that you might have. Steroid shots may in fact help, but that's very controversial as to whether or not that helps at all. But I started losing my vision. I got to Oklahoma City. I realized what was going on. The next morning, I called my neuro-ophthalmologist. Who even knew there was such a thing as a neuro-ophthalmologist? I called my neuro-ophthalmologist. I made an appointment for the very next day back in Philly. And I called my client and told him I couldn't come in, and got on the next plane and went back to Philly. Fortunately, because what happens is that in my case, it caused my central vision to really get very cloudy. So it means that I have a very difficult time seeing out of the center part of my eye. And also in my right eye, the lower part of my vision, I'm completely blind in the lower part of my vision. I can see around the periphery in my right eye. My left eye is actually a little bit better now, which is ironic because that was always my bad eye for 2 years. But at this point now, I'm not permitted to drive. And it made it very, very difficult for me to work, because so much of what I did was on paper. So much of what I did required me to drive and get around to places and be able to transport myself to places. So much of what I did required me to be able to see without any kind of impediment. So it took me a long time. I'm going to say it took me well over 2 years to fully adjust to the new normal. And it's not a great thing. And even as we're talking about it, I can see stuff. I see you. I see the screen. I can see things. One of the weird things about this condition that I have, as I have it, is that at 10 feet I can't see faces, which is a very weird thing. So if I see somebody approaching me and they're still 10 feet away, their face just looks gray to me, which is a very, very weird thing. It's a side effect that some people get with this condition. And what I've actually learned how to do is to tell people by their shape. So if I see that somebody looks, everybody has a certain shape, just like you have a face and your face looks a certain way, your shape looks a certain way. And if I'm at a formal dinner and all the guys are wearing tuxedos, I'm in big trouble. But if people are wearing whatever clothes they are and I see them, then I'll remember that Burke is wearing a black jacket and a blue shirt, and the guy standing next to you might be wearing a golf shirt, and I'll remember those things, so that even if I see you more than 10 feet away, I'll recognize you as a result of that.
If you're just joining us, Joel Burcat is our guest today. He's the author of Strange Fire. It's one of Kirkus Review's books of the week. And the story just got that much more amazing. If you just joined us, because Joel wrote this book just after being declared legally blind. And he had to figure out the workarounds to do that. The book is getting incredible accolades and testimonials from a bunch of other thriller writers who are some of the biggest names in the business. It's a real page turner, and it takes place in the fracking industry in Pennsylvania, where Joel is based. If you'd like a copy of the book, go to joelburcat.com, headlinebooks.com, where you can get a personalized autographed copy, or amazon.com, any of your booksellers. When you look back on this trilogy of books with Mike Jacobs, your life has changed dramatically since you started writing them. The central character of Mike Jacobs' life has changed too. I wonder about your writing style. Did that morph? Did that change since your first novel to this third one that you've completed? Are you a better writer? Was it, the difficulty of being blind when you wrote this last one, did that throw a wet blanket on the whole experience? Tell me about that journey of you and Mike Jacobs.
Clearly, I've become a better writer over time. And I think if you look at most writers, whether it's Philip Roth or any other great writer, you take a look at their early books, and the early books read a certain way. And then as you read their more recent novels, you realize, wow, he really did grow and become a much better writer. And I believe if you start with Drink to Every Beast, which I think was a great book, and then follow that with the second book, A Mid-Rage, which is about coal mining, and then this book, which is about fracking, Strange Fire. I think in addition to three really good stories, if you're reading it, you see, oh, okay, he's learning a few things about writing, and it's becoming a little tighter and a little crisper. And so I do believe that my writing has improved, just like the writing of Grisham and everybody else who's written a series or a lot of novels over time. You realize that this person has become much more of a master in terms of the writing. So yes, I've learned an awful lot about writing, and I believe that Strange Fire rather is a better novel. Let me also say that I don't just sit around. So I've got 3 other novels that are done basically, and that I'm still in the process of editing and tightening up. And right now I'm writing a new novel. So plus understand that my very, very first novel, what I like to call my starter novel, which is about the 1950 Phillies. My starter novel, which was called Whiz Kid, was the very first one I wrote, which I wrote before Drink to Every Beast, which was just endless. It was like 140,000 words. It was a lot of mistakes, a lot of things that I'm embarrassed about today. That was my very first novel. And then I wrote Drink to Every Beast. And so I've written 3 more novels, Little Brother, which is a mythical story about a small town police department that goes to war with the FBI, which could, of course, never happen. I've written a story called Lullabies and Other Lies, which is actually a young adult post-pandemic thriller. I imagined a world where a pandemic kills all of the adults and only teenagers survive. And the teenagers have to fend for themselves. Kind of a cross between The Road and Lord of the Flies. So kind of a dark story. And I only wrote a story that was that dark after I read some really, really dark and really, really popular young adult books. And I've written another story about a young woman lobbyist, environmental lobbyist. And then the one that I'm writing right now, which is called Fire and Ice, which is climate fiction, or what's known as cli-fi, about a lawyer who gets stuck in a horrendous hurricane as a result of, which is made much more so as a result of climate change and global warming. So I'm constantly writing. I wrote this morning. I write every morning and sometimes later into the afternoon. But you asked me before about my writing habits. Generally, the first thing I do after I get up and have a cup of coffee is I'll come to my writing room and I'll write for hours. I'll just write till about lunchtime, which is 12, 1 o'clock, whenever my stomach tells me to go get lunch. Then I'll have lunch and then I'll come back. Sometimes I'll write a little bit more. And then sometimes I'll do what I call the business of books. Maybe I'm getting ready for a program like this one tonight, where I might be, dealing with Headline Books, my publisher, or other issues like that. So I've got a lot of business issues that I have to deal with. And really a writer is kind of, unless your name is Patterson or King, a writer is really a small business. And you're like a mom and pop small business. You got to handle everything yourself. You got to turn on the lights in the morning. You got to, make sure all the shelves are dusted. You've got to make sure the shelves are stocked. You've got to take the money when the people come in and give them their stuff. You've got to smile for everybody. And then at the end of the day, you got to count the receipts. So it's very much a small business as a writer. So you've got to handle all that other stuff. Remembering, of course, that the stuff that you really, really enjoy the most is the writing part, which I love. That's the thing that I love the most, but I've got to do the other things. It just has to be done.
Since you've been diagnosed as legally blind, you've obviously had to figure out some workarounds on things. And you talked about reading. You still love to read. Do you read in Braille? Do you blow things up on a screen? How do you read? And how do you do some of the other things that you used to do that you can't do anymore, that you've changed how you do them?
A couple of things. Number one, fortunately for me, I don't need Braille. Like I said, I have enough vision that I can still see well enough, even though I don't see. I can't read paper very well. I really have a hard time reading paper, but I am able to use a screen. So I mentioned I have a yard-wide ultra high definition monitor. I put a sentence all the way across the monitor from one end to the other, and I can read that sentence pretty well. I've also learned that there are certain fonts that work better for me. So a font known as Arial Black is a very thick font, and the thickness seems to be better for me than the height of the letter. Another thing that I do is I use these very strange aids. So I've got my Mr. Magoo glasses here, which are only good for reading something about that far away. I've got right here, I've got this magnifier that I use that helps me because Mr. Gates decided that you can't enlarge certain things on a Microsoft screen. So to make up for that, I will use that. Sometimes I get my exercise by getting up and sitting down a lot, because certain things you just have to get up and put your nose against the screen to be able to read whatever it is, whatever that little tiny dialogue box says. So it's a combination of all of those things. And it's really a lot of workarounds. And at any point in time, I'll tell you something else I do is I've memorized so many things on the screen so that thankfully, the print button is always in the same place on my screen. If they really wanted to mess with people like me, what they would do is just have that print button be in a different place every time. That would totally mess with me. But since the print button's
That would mess with me too, so don't feel bad.
But since the print button's always in the same place, I can find that, or the save as button, I can find that if I'm making a PDF. So that it's always in the same place. So that those little dialogue boxes I think they are designed very specifically so that they're uniform for a variety of reasons, but certainly it helps people with vision issues such as myself.
It's an incredible story. Joel Burcat penned that book you see right over his shoulder there, Strange Fire, just a month after being diagnosed as legally blind. Now it's the international book launch, and Kirkus Review says it's one of their top picks of the week. It's also being praised by some heavy hitters out there, John LaCroix and Bill Landy and others, Lisa Gardner, who are all singing the praises of this thriller. So congratulations on the book launch, and congratulations for figuring out the workarounds to keep writing. I'm assuming you got 3 more. There's no sign of letting up now, huh?
No, I mean, this is what I love to do. I mean, this is the thing that I enjoy doing the most. I did retire from practicing law. It was way too complicated to try to practice law, and would have meant something that took me an hour to do before might have taken me 4 or 5 hours to do afterwards, and that wasn't going to work. My clients certainly wouldn't have put up with me billing them for 4 hours, and I don't know that my firm has been great to me, so I don't want to say anything negative about them, but I don't know that anybody would put up with somebody taking 2 or 3 or 4 times as long to do something, and that would be a problem. But my firm has been wonderful to me. But it's a lot of workarounds, it's a lot of adjustment, and fortunately for me, I've been able to devote really my full energy now to writing, and with the aids and with the screen and with Dragon and all those other tools, I'm able to write, which is something that I truly love, and I love being able to start with basically an empty page or an empty screen, and a month or 2 later actually have a whole novel that's written there. And sometimes I just wonder, where did that come from? And every now and again, when the spirits are right, and the words, you wake up in the morning and the words are just in your head. There's nothing quite like that feeling. You talk to any writer who writes a lot, and they will describe the same thing. And that is that every now and again, the gods whisper to you, and the words just are there and they come out. Your characters whisper to you. Somebody asked me, will there be another Mike Jacobs book? I'm not sure that there will be for a little while. I might let Mike rest for a while and sit in the waiting room until I call on him again. But I've got other characters who are singing to me right now, and they want to come out and they want to play also. So I'm letting those characters come forward right now in some of these other books.
What a great inspirational story from Joel Burcat, declared legally blind just before beginning this, what is now a book that people are just singing about from the mountaintops, Strange Fire. Congratulations, and thanks for spending time with us tonight.
Thank you, Burke. And I think Kathy may have some instructions if people want to get an autographed copy of the book, right? Because we do have them here, and we can, Kathy has a process. So if somebody wanted to order one right now virtually, we'd be able to accommodate them. So we can perhaps see whether Kathy has any names of anybody who wants that right now. The other thing too is there's an independent bookstore in Harrisburg called Midtown Scholar, and their URL is midtownscholar.com. And they already have autographed books. And if you go on their website and go to Midtown Scholar and type in my name, you can get a copy of this book autographed for the same price as the regular price. The Amazon price is the book, and they will mail you an autographed copy of the book. So that's kind of an easy way of getting an autographed copy of the book.
Very good. Midtownscholar.com. Also, headlinebooks.com has autographed copies of Strange Fire by Joel Burcat. Kirkus Reviews says it's one of their books of the week, and he wrote it right after being declared legally blind. You'd never know it by reading the book. It's a great legal thriller. If you love legal thrillers, this is one you got to check out, Strange Fire by award-winning author Joel Burcat. Joel, thanks for being here.
Burke, thank you very much. It's always fun and a pleasure to be interviewed by you.
Strange Fire is the book. Joel Burcat is the author. This is Zoom into Books with our friends at Headline Books, and for our show sponsors, SpeakerMatch.com and the Big Time Talker podcast. I'm Burke Allen. Thank you so much for being here. Now go out and make it a great day. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.